I retired on a Tuesday, not because Tuesday meant anything special, but because that was the day my last shift ended at the Geelong plant. And by Wednesday morning I was sitting on the back veranda of my house in Torquay with a cup of tea, watching the sun come up over the water, thinking this is it. This is what I worked 41 years for. My name is Graham Ashford, 63 years old, retired boilermaker, widower. My wife, Margaret, passed 4 years before I retired. Ovarian cancer. 14 months from diagnosis to the end. I won't talk much about that, because this story isn't about grief, though grief is woven through everything I did in those years, every decision I made, every room I sat in alone. What I will say is this: the house in Torquay was ours. Margaret and I bought it as a weekender in 1998 when our son, Brendan, was 12. We drove down every school holidays, every long weekend we could manage. We had fish and chips on the beach. We argued about whether to paint the back fence. We planted a jacaranda tree in the front yard that neither of us thought would survive, and it grew so tall it eventually knocked the gutter loose, and I had to get up on a ladder at 61 years old to fix it, cursing and laughing at the same time. When Margaret died, I couldn't sell it. I couldn't sell the Geelong house either, not at first. But eventually the Geelong house felt too big, too full of the wrong kind of quiet. So I sold it, took what I'd saved, and moved to Torquay permanently. The weekender became home. I repainted every room myself. I built a proper workshop out the back. I joined a lawn bowls club I never thought I'd enjoy and discovered I was actually quite good at it. For 2 years, it was peaceful. Then Brendan called. Brendan is 31. He works in IT sales up in Brisbane. Married a woman named Kylie 3 years ago. I liked Kylie well enough at the wedding. She was energetic, confident, talked a lot. Her family came from Ipswich, her parents, Ray and Cheryl, and her younger sister, Tamsin. They were loud at the reception. I remember thinking they were the kind of people who took up a lot of space. But I didn't think much more of it than that. Brendan and I had always been close, or I thought we had. After Margaret died, he came down every few months. We'd fish off the rocks, have a beer, watch the footy. It wasn't deep conversation, but it was consistent. It felt like the kind of relationship two blokes can have. Not everything said aloud, but the care understood anyway. So when he called that Thursday evening in March, I wasn't worried. I was in the workshop sanding a bookshelf I was building for the spare room. I wiped my hands on my jeans and answered. "Dad," he said. "Kylie's pregnant." I sat down on the workbench stool. I felt something warm move through my chest. A grandfather. I was going to be a grandfather. "That's wonderful, mate," I said. "That's really wonderful." "Yeah." He sounded strange. Off. Not the way a man sounds when he's ringing to share good news. "Look, Dad, there's something else. Kylie's had a rough first trimester. She's not coping well with the heat up here, and the doctors recommended she get somewhere cooler for a while. She needs rest, and her mum wants to be close to help." I waited. "We were thinking," Brendan said, "that maybe we could come down to Torquay, stay at your place for a bit, just while she gets through the worst of it." "Of course," I said. "Come down. I'll set up the spare room." "Right," he said. "The thing is, Cheryl and Ray would come too, to help with Kylie. And Tamsin, probably. She's between jobs at the moment." I remember the pause I took. I remember counting the rooms in my head. 3 bedrooms. Me in the main. 1 spare. Another smaller one I used as a study. That's a lot of people, Bren. It would only be temporary. A few weeks, maybe 2 months. Just until Kylie's past the difficult stage. 2 months. I told myself 2 months was manageable. I told myself it was for my grandchild. I told myself I was being a good father. "All right," I said. 2 months. But we sort out the sleeping arrangements properly. And I keep the workshop off limits. I've got tools in there that aren't safe. Yeah, of course, Dad. Absolutely. Thank you. He hung up before I could say anything else. They arrived 3 weeks later on a Saturday morning. I'd cleaned the house, bought extra groceries, set up the spare room with fresh linen. I'd even moved some of my things out of the study to make room for a second bed I'd borrowed from a neighbor. Kylie looked tired but cheerful. I gave her a hug and meant it. The pregnancy had given her a softness she hadn't had at the wedding. I found myself genuinely glad she was there. Then, I met the rest of them properly. Ray was a big man, mid-60s, loudly cheerful in the way people are when they've already decided they own the room. He shook my hand and then walked straight past me into the kitchen and opened my fridge. "Bit low on supplies, mate," he said. Not as a joke. Cheryl came in behind him, already on her phone, and said to no one in particular, "The lounge room's a bit small, isn't it?" Tamsin was 26, had AirPods in both ears, and barely acknowledged me. By that afternoon, Ray was in my armchair watching my television. I was sitting on a kitchen stool. I told myself it was fine. Temporary disruption, for a good reason. The second week, I noticed things. A new set of bath towels appeared in the bathroom. Fluffy, expensive looking, monogrammed with a K. My towels had been moved to the bottom shelf. I found my coffee maker unplugged and pushed to the back of the bench, replaced by a large silver pod machine I didn't recognize. When I asked Cheryl about it, she said, "Oh, Kylie can't stand the smell of filter coffee while she's pregnant. It sets off her nausea. The pod one is much more neutral." I stood there for a moment looking at my coffee maker pushed into the corner like it had done something wrong. I made my coffee in a saucepan that morning. The workshop I'd asked them not to touch was still locked. But one morning I came outside to find Ray sitting on the step outside it, smoking. "Ray," I said quietly, "I'd prefer you didn't smoke near the workshop. I've got timber and chemicals in there." He looked at me like I'd said something peculiar. "I'm outside, mate, hardly indoors. I'd still appreciate it." He stubbed the cigarette out on the decking rail, left the butt there, went back inside without saying anything. I picked the butt up, stood there for a long moment looking at the burn mark on the rail. Margaret and I had painted together the summer of 2003. That evening, Brendan found me in the kitchen and said, "Dad, I appreciate you having us. I just want you to know that Kylie really needed this." "Of course," I said. "How's she feeling?" "Better. The sea air is helping." I nodded. I wanted to say something about the coffee maker, about Ray, about Tamsin, who had started leaving dishes in the sink and wet towels on the bathroom floor. Instead, I said, "Good. That's good. I was collecting evidence. That's the thing I need you to understand, because it's important." I had started, quietly and without announcement, to document everything. I'd been doing it since the end of the first week, when something in me, some instinct built over 41 years of working with contracts and safety regulations, and men who said one thing and did another, told me I needed to be careful. I kept a notebook in the workshop. Every day I wrote the date, and then I wrote what I'd observed. The pod machine, the towels, Ray's cigarette. The morning I found Tamsin had moved my books off the shelf in the study and stacked them on the floor to make room for her clothes. The evening, I heard Ray and Cheryl talking in the lounge room about how the house just needed some updating and how a lick of paint would do wonders. I called a solicitor in Geelong on a Wednesday afternoon from my car in the bowling club car park. Her name was Patricia, and I'd used her when I settled Margaret's estate. I told her the situation. "Are they paying any rent?" she asked. "No." "Do they have a key?" "My son has a key. He gave them a copy. I've since had a locksmith quote for new locks." "Good," she said. "How long have they been there?" 19 days. "Get the new locks," she said. Don't wait. And keep the documentation going. If this escalates, you'll need it. Squatter provisions in Victoria are real, Graham. Don't let this drift. I didn't let it drift. That weekend, while everyone was at the beach, I had the locks changed. I cut 3 keys, one for Brendan, one spare for the lockbox outside, one for me. I did not give Ray or Cheryl a key. That evening, I told Brendan what I'd done. He looked at me for a long moment. Dad, it's my house, Brendan. I want to be clear about that. Something shifted in his face. Something I didn't understand then. The 4th week, Cheryl asked me about the garden. She was standing at the kitchen window looking out at the backyard, which had a small vegetable patch Margaret had planted years ago that I'd kept going ever since. Tomatoes, silver beet, some herbs. Kylie's been reading about how important fresh vegetables are during pregnancy, Cheryl said. We were thinking of extending the veggie patch, maybe removing the garden shed to make more room. I set down my cup. That shed, I said, was built by my wife. I'm not removing it. Cheryl looked at me with that particular expression, half surprise, half affront that I'd come to know as her default when she encountered a limit. It's just a shed, Graham. It's not just a shed. There was a long silence. Then she said, Right. Well, we'll have to think of something else, and walked out of the kitchen. That night I sat in the workshop for a long time. I thought about Margaret, about the shed she'd built over a long weekend in 2009, swearing and laughing in equal measure, her hair tied back, sawdust on her shirt. I thought about what she'd think of all this. I knew exactly what she'd think. She'd have used considerably more direct language than I was using. I opened my notebook. I called Patricia again the next morning. I want to know what my options are, I said. Not just if it escalates. Now, what can I legally do? She walked me through it. I listened carefully. I took notes. By the end of that week, I had done 4 things that no one in the house knew about. The 5th week, Ray started talking about improvements. It happened at dinner, a dinner Cheryl had cooked, which I'll admit was decent. A lamb roast, but which she'd somehow made feel like she was hosting it in her own house. Ray put down his fork and said, with the confidence of a man who expects agreement, Graham, I've been thinking. That back veranda is in a bit of rough shape. Some of those boards need replacing. I know a bloke who does decking does good work. Reasonable price. Might be worth getting him in. I looked at Brendan. Brendan was looking at his plate. The veranda is fine, I said. I'm just saying. A few boards are soft. Ray, I said. Ray leaned back and gave a short laugh that wasn't really a laugh. Right. 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 Just trying to help. I appreciate that. No work is to be done on this house without my say-so. That's not a discussion. No work is his aiding. That's not a discussion. The table went quiet. Kylie was looking at her hands. Tamsin had her AirPods in again. Cheryl was wearing an expression that could have carved stone. Later that night, Brendan knocked on my bedroom door. I was reading. I put the book down. He sat on the end of the bed, the way he used to, when he was a teenager and had something difficult to say. For a moment he was 12 years old again, sitting at the foot of our bed in Geelong, telling me he'd broken a neighbor's window with a cricket ball and didn't know what to do. Dad, he said, I need to tell you something. I waited. Kylie's family they've been talking about. He stopped, started again. Ray has been looking at your property, not just the veranda. He's been talking about this house, about how it's too big for one person, about whether there might be a possibility of a longer arrangement. I looked at him for a long time. How long has this been the plan, Brendan? He didn't answer straight away. That was answer enough. Did you know? I asked. When you called me in March, did you know this was what they wanted? I didn't, Kylie mentioned that her parents were having trouble with their place in Ipswich, rent going up. I said maybe they could visit. And then it sort of became, he ran his hand through his hair. I didn't plan it, Dad. I promise. But I didn't stop it either. I should have. I nodded slowly. Did Patricia say anything useful? He asked. I stared at him. How did you know about Patricia? He had the grace to look ashamed. Kylie found a letter on your desk. I'm sorry. That was wrong. I stood up and walked to the window. The jacaranda was lit by the streetlight, its branches moving slowly in the night wind. You read my mail, I said. Not with anger, with something heavier than anger. Dad, I'd like you to go to bed, Brendan. We'll talk more tomorrow. He left. I sat down in the chair by the window and stayed there a very long time. The next morning, I made myself coffee in my own coffee maker, which I had moved back to its proper place the previous week. I sat at the kitchen table and waited for everyone to come downstairs. When they were all seated, Kylie with her tea, Cheryl and Ray with their pod coffees, Tamsin barely awake, Brendan not meeting my eyes, I spoke. I want to tell you all something, I said. And I'd ask that you let me finish before anyone says anything. The table went still. This house belongs to me. It was mine and my wife's, and now it's mine alone. I invited you here for 2 months as an act of goodwill, because Kylie is carrying my grandchild, and I wanted to support that. That offer stood as long as it was treated in the spirit it was given. Ray opened his mouth. I asked you to let me finish, I said quietly. He closed it. Over the past 5 weeks, certain things have happened in this house that have made it clear to me that some of you are here with a different understanding of the situation. That's not something I'm willing to continue accommodating. I took a breath. Several weeks ago, I had this house's locks changed. Some of you may have noticed. I also placed a formal letter with my solicitor documenting your stay, its conditions, and the original agreed end date. That letter was logged on the 30th of March. It outlines that this is a temporary, rent-free arrangement with no security of tenure, and that the property is to be vacated by the agreed date without exception. Cheryl's face was very still. Additionally, I said, I notified the local council 2 weeks ago of the occupation of the property for insurance and liability purposes, and I have in my possession a written record of every modification to the house's contents or routine that occurred without my consent. Ray made a sound in his throat. The agreed date is the 14th of June, I said. That date has not changed. I will help you arrange transport and accommodation if you need it. But on the 15th of June, I will be the only person living in this house. Tamsin had taken both AirPods out. That was how I knew it had landed. Kylie had tears on her face. I softened, then, because she was the only one in that room who I believed hadn't come here with bad intentions. She was just a pregnant woman who'd wanted her mum nearby, and her mum had taken a mile from an inch. Kylie, I said, you are welcome to visit. You and Brendan both. My grandchild is welcome in this house anytime, for as long as you like. But the arrangement we have now ends on the 14th. Ray pushed back his chair. This is outrageous, he said. We've been here helping this household. You've been living here rent-free, I said, in a home that isn't yours, making plans about a property that doesn't belong to you. I don't call that helping. He stood up. We have rights. You have the rights of guests whose invitation ends on the 14th of June, I said. He walked out of the kitchen. Cheryl followed him. Tamsin looked at Brendan, then at me, then left too. Brendan and I sat at the table with Kylie between us. She was crying quietly now. I'm sorry, Graham, she said. I didn't, my mum. She just, I know, I said. And I did know. I wasn't angry at Kylie. I was sad, mostly. Sad that this was how the first months of her pregnancy had gone. sad that my son had found himself caught sideways between two families and hadn't known how to be straight with either one. "Dad," Brendan said, "I'm sorry. I should have handled this differently from the start." "You should have," I agreed. "But here we are. Are we okay?" I thought about that. I thought about a 12-year-old boy telling me about a broken window, not to avoid trouble but because he couldn't stand carrying the guilt. I thought about the man that boy had grown into, who wasn't bad, just conflict avoidant, and perhaps too easily led. I thought about Margaret, who would have had this conversation in week 1 and wouldn't have lost a minute's sleep over it. "We will be," I said. "It's going to take some time. But yes, we'll be okay." Ray and Cheryl left 2 days later. They didn't say goodbye to me. I stood in the workshop and heard their car reverse out of the driveway and didn't feel what I expected to feel. I'd expected relief. Instead, I felt tired and a little sad, and underneath it all steady, the way you feel when something you've been quietly bracing against for a long time finally resolves. Tamsin stayed until the 11th. I'll give her this. She stripped her bed and left the room clean. Brendan and Kylie left on the 14th. As agreed, I helped them carry their bags to the car. Kylie hugged me for a long time. "I want the baby to know you," she said. "The baby will know me," I said. "I promise." Brendan and I stood on the footpath for a moment after Kylie got in the car. The jacaranda was dropping blossoms on the lawn. "I'd need to rake again." "I'm going to do better," he said. "I know you will," I said. He drove away. I stood there until the car turned the corner. Then I went inside, unplugged the pod machine, put it in the garage, and made myself a pot of filter coffee in my own coffee maker, in my own kitchen, on a perfectly quiet Saturday morning in Torquay. I sat on the back veranda and looked out at the water. I thought about what I'd learned not just in those 5 weeks, but in the years since Margaret died. About how loneliness can make you say yes to things you should think harder about. About how love for your children doesn't have to mean surrendering the boundaries that protect you. About how silence, used wrongly, becomes weakness. But silence used with intention, while you're gathering your thoughts, your evidence, your legal standing, is something else entirely. I've spoken to a lot of men my age since this happened. Retired men, widowers, men living alone in houses they built or bought or inherited. And I've noticed something. We are often the last people to ask for help and the first to give ground we shouldn't. We were raised to accommodate, to not cause a fuss, to keep the peace. Even when peace means letting people walk through you. I'm not saying become a different person. I'm not saying become hard. I'm saying know the difference between being generous and being used. Know it early. Name it plainly. Because the kindest thing you can do for the people you love, including your children, is to be clear about who you are and what you will and won't accept. Your home is not just a building. It is the container of your life, the place where your memories live, where someone you loved touched the walls and planted things in the ground and left their mark in ways that no one else can see unless you show them. You are allowed to protect that. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to change the locks, call the solicitor, sit in your workshop writing in a notebook, and wait for the right moment, not out of coldness, but out of a quiet, clear-eyed love for the life you've built and the right to finish living it on your own terms. The jacaranda is flowering again this year. Margaret would be glad to know it's still standing.